Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about this photograph. I absolutely love this picture. It's a weigh-in taken in 1934, and I've acquired this picture recently from a good friend of mine called Danny McFarlane, who's given me access to his collection, and in particular this picture. Now, for those who don't know Danny was an Olympic level amateur referee from Sunderland. Really good lad. Just gone over now to learn his trade as a professional referee. Danny boxed himself for the police, the Royal Marines, and at one time he was rated in the top 10 amateurs in the UK at his weight. He's a really good guy. He's related to two Sunderland boxers called Tom Richwood, one of whom was his great-grandfather. And he's got a particular interest in Sunderland pictures, which is why he has this photograph. So the picture is taken on December the 17th, 1934, inside the ring at the new St James's Hall in Newcastle. And as you can see, the scales are at the back. You can see the ropes at the side, so they're in the ring. This is how weigh-ins were done back in those days. This, in fact, was taken. This picture was taken after the weigh-in, which occurred 2 o'clock that afternoon. And the boxing would start that evening at, I don't know, 7:30. So these guys would be in the ring, some of them, within 6 hours of being weighed in. They had to, for two of the contests, they actually had to make weight because they were quite important bouts. It's typical these days for 4 and 6 round lads or shows without particularly any important bouts on. They can often weigh in before the boxing, maybe 4, 5 o'clock, 3 in the afternoon, something like that. But usually these days, for important contests, the weigh-in takes place the day before, not then. All weigh-ins then took place on the day of the fight. Now, looking at the photograph, we can see, well, there's 8 boxers there for one. The chap behind the scales is, I think, the Newcastle promoter, Mr. J.J. Paget. There were 2 other gentlemen at the back who I can't identify. One of them is likely to be a board official. But there's 8 boxers there, and the 2 in the front have had to weigh in, and they're probably the last 2 to get on the scales. And this is on the left-hand side with his braces holding up his trousers. We have Roy Mills of Sunderland, and on the right-hand side is a Carlisle boxer called Johnny Mack. They're weighing in the welterweight limit. Mack's just come in at 10.3 3/4 pounds. Mills has come in at 10.6 1/2. On the left-hand side, in the dressing gown, is a Welsh boxer from Ammanford called Billy Quinlan. And Quinlan was, at the time that this photograph was taken, was the Welsh champion. And over on the right-hand side, in that rather fetching bomber jacket, is Douglas Parker of Sunderland, and by God could that boy hit. Dougie Parker was originally from Aberdeen, but he settled in Sunderland round about 1927 and boxed there for the rest of his career. Dougie Parker at the time of this contest was the Northern Area lightweight champion. In 1934, the Northern Area was everything north of a line from Yarmouth up into Shropshire, and everything south of that was in the southern area. So the 2 areas were quite simple. Northern area therefore included places like Nottingham, Derby, the North Midlands, the whole of Lancashire, the whole of Yorkshire, and the whole of the North East. Unlike today, the northern area really goes in the line from sort of Scotch Corner or Catterick up to Berwick and across to Carlisle. So much smaller areas. So in those days, the southern area was kind of Birmingham down, and the northern area you could think of as kind of roughly Derby, Nottingham up. Now, at the top of the bill, you can see 2 gentlemen shaking hands. The black guy on the left is an American fighter by the name of Jimmy Taranti. And Jimmy's been boxing in the UK and Europe since about 1931. He's come over from the States where he had quite a decent record. He's a light heavyweight here, I think. And he's shaking hands with the very, very famous Sunderland man, Jack Casey. And Jack Casey in this photograph looks about 40, but he's actually 26 years old. Jack, by this stage, has had over 200 contests. He's a real seasoned veteran of the ring. He doesn't like, well, he has quite a number of bouts after this, but he's on the way down, is Jack, at this stage. He boxed for the British middleweight title in 1932 and gave Len Harvey a hell of a fight. So we have Taranti and Casey. Right, between Jack Casey and Douglas Parker is another black fighter called Charlie McDonald. This is another Sunderland middleweight and a real good fighter back in his day. At this stage, Charlie's had close to 200 contests. He is close to retirement, really. He retired a couple of years later, but he was a great fighter, was Charlie. Never came anywhere near a title. His father, in fact, came over originally, I think, from the West Indies and started boxing in Sunderland in 1905. And Charlie started out in the mid-1920s. I think from memory it's 1925 when he had his first bout. So he's been around about 9 years as Charlie, and he's close to 200 contests. And his opponent, who is next to Billy Quinlan and Jimmy Taranti in the middle there, this is Jack O'Brien. He's a Belfast fighter, and he is going to be fighting against McDonald. They are going to be boxing at 10 3-minute rounds. Taranti and Casey are scheduled for 12-3. So there's two 12 3-minute rounders on the bill, two 10 3-minute rounders on the bill, and a 6-rounder, probably 2-minute round, two local lads opening the show. So this is a quality bill. December the 17th, 1934. Now let's look at these. What I particularly like about this particular era in boxing is that these guys, you know, they fought everybody on the way up. There was no hand-picking opponents. There were no journeymen or way fighters they had to contend with. They were just thrown in from a young age. If they had a few decent wins, then they would be thrown in with another lad, a local lad who probably had a few decent wins. And it would be quite normal for these chaps to, by the time they had 50 bouts and they were on the way up and really making a name for themselves, they might have lost 5 or 10. It didn't really matter. If you lost, you got on with it. And if you had a rematch and won, you moved on. If you lost again, then perhaps you weren't going to get that much further, but there'd be plenty of opportunities and plenty of local lads to fight, regardless. Now, at this stage, in 1934, well, let's look at today. Typically in the UK now, in a year, there will be round about 260 to 290 professional tournaments held across the country. In 1934, when this photograph was taken, there were 4,642 shows in the United Kingdom. So that's round about, 15 times more than there are today. You could see boxing virtually everywhere. This bill was the third bill to have taken place that week in the new St James's Hall. Professional bill. There was one on the Saturday, one on the Friday preceding this, and then there was this one on the Monday night. And in that particular week, if you wanted to see a professional tournament in the North East, you could pick from 13 shows that were taking place all over the place. In the pit villages, in places like Middlesbrough, Darlington, Sunderland, Newcastle, etc. South Shields and so on. Now, we don't have 13 shows a year in the North East these days. Well, we probably have around about 13 shows a year, but in those days there were 13 in a week. And this was actually significantly down from 1933, where in a given week in the North East you could probably get 30, 35 shows to pick from. They were just boxing absolutely everywhere. So these guys are coming up from that, and to rise to the top, even in the North East, and to be fighting on a bill like this, you really had to be something quite special. Now, looking at the records, at this point, Casey, who's top of the bill, fighting Taranti. Casey's had 215 professional contests, of which he's won 148. He's in with Taranti, the American. Taranti's, as I say, been over since about 1931. He's already boxed at the Royal Albert Hall against Len Harvey. He's used to fighting really top men, and here he's very much the favourite in this bout. Casey, as I say, is on the way down, but Casey will give anybody a scrap. He was one of the hardest fighters that the North East has ever produced. And I think Sunderland in particular has produced tough men. I can think of Casey as being the most outstanding, but even in recent years, two real hard cases from Sunderland were Billy Hardy, of course, and Glenn Foote, who I saw box a lot of times. Glenn was a really hard man. Billy certainly was. And Casey was the first of them. So he's going to give Taranti a good scrap. The bout between Dougie Parker and Billy Quinlan. Parker, the guy in the bomber jacket, 159 contests he's had by the time of this photograph, of which he's won 89. And Quinlan has had 93 and won 61. So there's no home and away here. These guys are perfectly capable of beating each other. And if you're going to win, you're going to get into the ring, either of these guys could win. And this is what made boxing so, must have been fantastic to watch in those days, because all fights were really, truly competitive. All these guys are trying to win. But look at Roy Mills. He's only a young lad. He's had 97 contests, of which he's won 57, drawn 10 and lost 30. But he's a classic example of somebody who gets over defeats. He has 30 losses by this stage, but he goes on to become the Northern Area champion at middleweight from 1936 to 37. And as I say, the Northern Area is the whole area in the top half of England. So, yeah, Johnny Mack is his opponent. That year, Mack's had 27 bouts. This is his 28th bout in 1934, of which he's only lost 2. And his record coming in is a total of 50 bouts, won 38. And then Charlie McDonald. He's had 186 contests, of which he's won 125. And his opponent, O'Brien, from Belfast, has had 83 contests, of which he's won 51. Now, Quinlan against Parker, the two guys on the outside, they'd already boxed each other in a British lightweight title eliminator earlier that year at Newcastle, and Quinlan had beaten Parker, and Quinlan went on to box for the British title that year against Harry Misler, and he lost. So he's boxed for the British title, so he's at the top of his game, as indeed is Parker. Now, the new St James's Hall in Newcastle, where this contest took place, was opened for boxing only 4.5 years before this, in 1930. And in fact, in 1933, it was holding professional shows 6 nights a week, virtually for the entire year. So you could see boxing every night from Monday through till Saturday if you wanted to. They weren't all big shows. Some of them you could get in for as little as 6p or 2.5p, and you'd be watching 6 and 8 rounders with young lads coming up from the back streets of Newcastle and the pit villages surrounding it. It was purpose-built for boxing. The hall held somewhere in the region of 3,500, and this particular night the place was absolutely packed. Now, one of the other reasons why I like this picture so much is because I've been aware of this contest since probably 1976, when I was, 18 or 19 years old. And I used to go along to Newcastle Central Library every Saturday morning with a notebook like this. This is in fact the original notebook from that time. It was bought from Woolworths. And I used to go through all the old newspapers, copying down the results of the shows that took place. And I've even found in this particular book my original notes from that day. I think this is probably about 1976 when I did this, showing the results here. Jimmy Taranti beating Casey on points over 12, Billy Quinlan outpointing Douglas Parker over 12, McDonald outpointing Jack O'Brien over 10, and Roy Mills outpointing Johnny Mack over 10. And you can see also a 6-rounder between a lad from Blyth called Bob Ainsley, who outpointed a South Shielder by the name of Jack Mountain. So it's really lovely, after all these years of me being interested in boxing in the northeastern area, particularly in Newcastle, to come across this particular picture. Now, these aren't unusual. There's quite a lot of weigh-in pictures that I've seen for the Newcastle shows, and I've got quite a number of them in my collection. But I particularly like this one, simply because of the magnitude of the guys that are appearing on it, and especially Jack Casey. Now, I don't have in my collection the handbill for this particular event, rather sadly. I do have quite a number of handbills for 1934, and I have the handbill, in fact, for the tournament that took place the following week, on December the 24th, 1934. As you can see, this handbill only costs a penny, and there's some pretty good names on that bill, I can tell you. they're really fascinating things, handbills. I've got, well, probably 1,000 in my collection like this, especially from this kind of era. And this is the sort of publicity flyer that you don't really see anymore. It's all kind of done these days on Facebook or Instagram, and it's word of mouth and so on and so forth. And the sort of the collecting side's kind of gone out of the modern game. You don't really see programs anymore either. But these handbills are absolutely superb. And by the way, note the date, December the 24th, 1934. That's Christmas Eve. I mean, you can't imagine people wanting to go and watch boxing on a Christmas Eve these days. You can't imagine any fighters wanting to fight on a Christmas Eve these days either. Let's have a look at the report for the show. This is from the Newcastle Daily Chronicle, and it says Casey hammered. Taranti wins by a street. And it says, perhaps the biggest crowd that has ever been in the new St James's Hall, Newcastle, was that of last night, when a great programme of boxing produced the following results. And there it lists the results. It talks about the fact that it was a tough contest, despite the fact Casey was hammered. It mentions here that early in the 7th, Casey sent out a terrific right, which caught Taranti plumb on the jaw. And as he was falling, the Sunderland man landed a hard left on a similar spot. And Taranti went down flat on his back and was out, but it was onto one knee and was on his legs at the count of 9. So even though Taranti wins by a street and he's a top-line American fighting a kind of boxer on the way down, Casey is such a big puncher, and he had a hell of a chin, did Casey. I don't think it did him a lot of good in the long run, because, you know, I can remember Casey being around in 1973, and he really looked like he'd had over 200 contests, I can tell you. But he managed to put Casey on his backside, but lost the fight by a street. It also talks about the Parker and Quinlan contest. It states here they were matched at 9 stone 10, and they were both inside the poundage, etc. And that was a decent fight as well, but the result went, as it had done earlier that year in the February, to Billy Quinlan of Wales. So this rather splendid photograph, it's just one item from my collection. And every so often I'm going to come on here and feature items like this and just talk through them, just so we can have a little look at how boxing was back in the day, because that's what this channel is all about. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and thank you very much.